So we'll reconvene the Planning Commission meeting of, what is the date? July 30th. So we still had one item left from our discussion of the introduction, and that was the plan preparation, which Mr. Maurer developed a paragraph to reflect the how the plan was prepared, especially in relation to community input and their involvement in the process. Has everyone had a chance to look at that yet?
Not quite.
Okay.
I'm on it.
People in the audience have it. It's, yeah.
On this paragraph? This new paragraph?
I'm thinking. I heard you. No, I heard the question. I'm thinking. It is a new item.
I think it would be appropriate to
I think so,
public
too.
comment on it.
Okay.
I'm afraid to say anymore.
So if we're going to have public comment, would you prefer before we have comments or after? That's what I'm thinking too. Okay. So discussion, anybody have any, I have a few suggested edits.
Well, I have a couple comments.
Okay.
It says this input has directly shaped the general plan, and this is input that apparently ended in 2010, with the exception of written comments and so forth that we've gotten starting this year. The current draft plan may change. It may change substantially from what it is now. And the current draft plan may have been different, I don't know in what respects, from the previous version, which resulted from all of these community meetings and so forth. And so when it says this input has directly shaped the general plan, I'm not sure that's going to be accurate, or actually is.
Well, even if it's changed, it's still input by people. I don't imagine that they're going to stop communicating and participating in the process. So don't you think even though the direction, the content of the plan could change, the fact that that content was directly shaped by the voice of the people, I don't think that's going to change. Do you?
If you take into account the current public comments, that's right.
Well, in the future public comments too.
In future
Because well, this is part of the plan when it's completed, but what we're trying to say here is that when it's done and adopted, that public input helps shape it. Now, what it looked like finally, we don't know yet, but I think with some assurance we could say that public input shaped it. I think that's the intent here.
Well, unless Mr. Wooster has more, my comments are similar. My reaction is similar, that in addition to this input has directly shaped the general plan, the previous sentence starts out over the update process. And the update process, if you look at the paragraph as a whole, appears to refer to the last sentence. The outreach included several rounds of community workshops in 2007 and 2010, board sessions and various other meetings. So I think it's inaccurate to say that the update process is, and I know that's not literally what it says, but in the context, I believe that's the thrust of it. It would be inaccurate to say that the update process was in 2007 through 2010, and that the update process was also limited to the input methods described herein. The update process began in 2007. That's a fair statement. It has been ongoing since then. It's still ongoing. It's going to be ongoing for the rest of this year and next. And there's going to be all kinds of input in many forms, written that we get, verbal that we get, from us, from our own ideas, from the Board of Supervisors themselves, and people communicate their desires and their wishes about the general plan in all sorts of ways, directly and indirectly. So I don't think this fairly describes the update process that we've.
So is it the 2000, I mean, I'd be fine with striking 2007 and 2010.
And you might add the, numerous planning commission and board of supervisors
That's what
study
that was
sessions.
one of my suggestions.
And ongoing public comment
Sure.
written in at the meetings.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't have to
I
just
think
reference those workshops.
If you say that it has included those things, it's not limited to those things. I made the comment last week that, one of the ways that public expresses their desires about the future of the county is when people come up for election. Now, that was kind of poo-pooed, but it's true. That's what they do. And in terms of numbers, in far greater numbers than any of the meetings combined, town hall type meetings combined. So if you want to include all those various sources, okay, but they directly and indirectly shape the general plan.
So, David, because obviously this process was started a long time ago, we've been brought a document that we're working off of. Instead of saying this input directly shaped the general plan, could we just say that input from the county supervisors, planning commissioners, and all of the above participants shaped the general plan instead of directly shaped? Is it the word directly that's the problem?
That's part of the problem. And then the source, as you point out, the source is broader than what's included here. The source of the shaping, if you will.
So what do you want it to say? They started it, you ended it?
I don't understand why you wouldn't want to give people their due.
Why am I not
Seriously.
giving people their due?
Well, because it just seems like you're trying to eliminate that they had any impact on this process at all.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying it's
Okay.
not, this is not the, this is.
So what do we need to add to be
this-
more inclusive of the people that you're talking about? That's all I'm saying. What do we need to add?
Okay, let me make a suggestion.
Thank you, Kelly.
The question that says this input has directly shaped the general plan, that should probably go last.
Oh, and then you list everybody else first.
And then the last sentence should be more inclusive and say the outreach included several rounds of community workshops, numerous Board of Supervisors study sessions, countless meetings in individual communities to develop the community plans, written and oral comments from the public during the update process, and participation in Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors meetings.
I'm totally good with that. Yeah.
Me too. Good job.
Now, the,
Send it to the press room.
okay. The only other thing there's just a couple of little minor edits, it's taking some words out, and that is the general plan update process began in 2007 and included an extensive public outreach process to solicit feedback on major concepts, alternatives, and proposals, period. I don't think we need throughout the process. We already talked about the process in the beginning of the sentence. Over the update process, hundreds of, I would say, residents, property and business owners, and stakeholders representing all segments of the county participated, and then just keep going with the other.
Well, we don't know that they represented all segments. That's possibly a good guess, but there's no indication of that. You don't know that for a fact.
Can you say various segments?
There you go, that's fine, yeah. Or many interests. We could say many interests. But no, I'm good with various segments, that's good. So, have you got that, Peter?
Yes.
Would you,
We'll need to work with Kelly to get the last of his part, but if you have.
okay. Shall we hear it back? Are you guys
Yes.
ready for that? Okay.
The general plan update process began in 2007 and included an extensive public outreach process to solicit feedback on major concepts, alternatives, and proposals. Over the update process, hundreds of residents, property and business owners, and stakeholders representing various segments of this community participated by providing their ideas, passions, and energy to plan Calaveras County's future.
One other thing, I was suggesting instead of this community, instead say the county.
The outreach included several rounds of community workshops, numerous board of supervisor study sessions, written and oral comments, and this is where wasn't able to write fast enough. Kelly, did you have that written down?
And maybe that's bulleted, but it could be like joint Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission.
Or we could say Planning
meetings.
Commission and Board of Supervisors study sessions. So
Yes.
it includes individual ones of what we're doing right now, as well as the joint workshops, as well as, study sessions just with the board.
And maybe you want to bullet these, I don't know. And you said written comments and,
Well, I was leaving in the phrase that I think Peter left out, that the countless meetings in individual communities to develop the community plans, I was leaving in.
Oh, I'm
uh-huh.
sorry, yeah,
You
that
jumped
was in there.
ahead.
I jumped ahead. That was in there still. What was the rest of written and oral comments, and then you had something else? that
I
you said?
didn't have it written down.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. We'll get to you,
Maybe
Tom.
Tom has it.
Okay.
You guys got that.
After community plans, he said, written and oral comments from the public, participation in Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors meetings, period.
Well, and then we'd go on to say about the countless meetings and individual communities develop community plans, right?
That was in there before that.
Oh, okay, all
So
right.
the last sentence we'll read then, second last sentence. The outreach included several rounds of community workshops, numerous Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors study sessions, countless meetings in individual communities to develop the community plans, written and oral comments from the public, and participation in the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors meetings.
Actually, that's the
This
next to the
input
last.
has directly shaped the general plan.
So,
Did
since,
that sentence include reference to 2007 and 10?
I struck that out.
Right, because now we're talking about all these different sources.
right.
Yeah.
So should you say in the last reference to Planning Commission, Board of Supervisors, I think you still said study sessions or sessions, but public hearings? Should it, in the very
And
last?
participation in Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors meetings or
That
hearings.
includes everything, doesn't it? All types of meetings?
Well, because you've already,
We
you're
already said
listing.
Study sessions, so we
Right.
can say hearings.
I think so, yeah, hearings, just to, show the difference between the two. Are we good with that? All right.
Yes.
Public comment on our plan preparation edition?
Muriel Zeller, Valley Springs. I agree about the sentence, this input has directly shaped the general plan, because I don't think the current draft does reflect the public input that was ongoing between 2007 and 2010. And I think what's important to note is that the purpose of that public process was to create the milestone documents that would then become the foundation for the general plan. And those milestone documents reflected the public participation that is required by law. What has happened is that the original consultant was fired, and somehow the public process, which they led along with the Community Development Agency and the Planning Department, somehow became invalidated And we're now told that our public participation from that time is dated and irrelevant. And even though it went into shaping those milestone documents. And I don't really see those milestone documents much reflected in our current draft. People, the process drug on so long. Mintier got fired, Rainey was hired, then Rainey couldn't do it, so they had to bring on Amy Augustine, and they have so many sub-consultants, and the process drags on and on and on. When the process began, people participated enthusiastically, and that enthusiastic participation is reflected in those milestone documents. So when you're talking about plan preparation, maybe you should talk about how this actually happened, how the public participation process evolved, and how the original consultant was fired and now we have different consultants. And maybe we should have started the public participation process all over again. I'm very uncomfortable with the paragraph as written, and even with some of your edits and revisions, because I don't think the current plan reflects public input at all.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think it, excuse me, Colleen Platt again. I tend to agree with Muriel. I think that that sentence is pretty strong, and I think it's not real accurate. Somebody said this input has helped shaped. That might be closer, or you could take this sentence out altogether and just said, just don't include that sentence. That's another idea.
Anyone else? All right, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back for discussion.
Well, I wasn't involved back during this outreach, so I can't comment on whether that sentence is accurate or not. I assumed it was because Fawn, who has been involved.
Well, I have been, and I think what they're alluding to is that it was early on, but that the direction that was headed on seems to have been hijacked, or it's different. And so I think what they're saying is that it was reflective, and it probably was true, but I think they're saying, putting words in their mouth, that it's less true now, the direction they see that this process going. But I think it's important to leave it in there because I think whatever the outcome, it has had an impact.
I think it reads well. I think it's a general statement. It's accurate in a general sort of way. I think that it would be in error to take the position that the writing of the general plan should be somehow frozen in time 8 years ago, or some number 5 to 8 years ago, and with no additional input or changes or influences subsequently. That's not realistic. I mean, I'm sure that some people would like it for it to be that way, but that's not how the government works. And I think your statement is fine with the edits that we've come up with.
I'm good with the edits as well, but I think that some confusion's coming in here for me because comment letter after public speaker, after everything, they all directly state that they didn't want us making changes because they created this plan and participated in it, and now they're saying, well, we don't want to take full credit for it anymore because it's not our plan anymore. We're working off the basis of that work that was completed from 2008. And Fawn, you've said it 100 times, hundreds and thousands of people completed that work. And so we're not editing the entire work, the whole project. All we're doing is going through, updating portions and trying to move the process forward. I'm good with this statement. I think that, you know, if the word directly shaped is offensive, I would be okay with changing it to something else. But I think everybody has played a role in this. Everybody deserves credit for what they've done in this, whether it be in the past or today. But it's not going to stay the same as it was in 2008 because we're updating it. That's the whole idea of the word update. We're making changes and bringing it current to today.
And I would add that there's a large segment of the population that doesn't believe that the process should have been entered into at all in 2007, but instead, to the extent necessary, the 96 plan should have been edited, updated in whatever way was required to be compliant with various factors, various issues. So those people's desires aren't reflected in this at all. This is more than just an update to 96. This is a new plan. I think Mr. Maurer would agree with that. So the people who had the influence in this time frame here, their views are very strongly represented in the body of the general plan. And that doesn't mean that it's going to stay there word for word over the next year and a half that it's going to move through this process. But I think they should be awfully satisfied with as it is right now, and they should be still satisfied with the 2014 draft being the basis for the ultimate version. They should be ecstatic.
Property rights people weren't even represented.
I think we're done, Tom.
Oh, we did?
Yes, thank you. Ted, did you have any comments?
I think the paragraph as submitted is pretty complete, but I wasn't there for all of the public meetings, and on purpose. I kind of felt it was inappropriate. If I went to all those meetings, I would have a lot of pride of ownership in what took place. And when you're in that situation, then you don't vote yes or no on the thing when you're done. I mean, I purposely stayed back and watched, because that's the only way you can make a sound judgment, I think. But I think it represents most of what I've heard from the people who had gone to the meetings, though there is certainly a group who are unhappy with it, and I can understand that. I just don't know what to do about it. I think the kind of public input we had might help eliminate what took place on the last time we went through this, which was quite a few years ago, but I was here for the last of it, which was the community plan part of the last general plan to do with White Pines. And you can't believe how many people were there for that meeting that wanted to make important changes to the new general plan. And that was the meeting that we were scheduled to vote yay or nay. We'd had all these other meetings, everything had been moved and seconded, and okay, now we're down to say the final, and then all the people showed up to complain, and we tried to hopefully avoid that by having a public process start earlier. I don't really have a problem with this, but of course, I wasn't one of those that has pride of ownership.
Okay, so is there any other discussion, or is there a motion to put plan preparation in the introduction as amended?
So moved.
Oh, I think Ted beat you on that one, Kelly.
And I'll second it.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay. So, we're off to noise, finally.
They don't have the Angels Theater, I love the 4-digit number.
Yeah.
Ever go there? It's a lot of stuff.
Peter?
Trying to get stuff organized here. Okay, well, finally, an element. No, it's very important work that we've done to set the framework for what we're going to be doing the rest of the time with this. So the noise element, one of the 7 mandated elements of the general plan. I chose to start with this because it was the element that had the least amount of comments on it. I thought we could sort of wet our teeth on going through goals, policies, text on this one, and then dive into the more complex ones after this. I provide you a staff report with some suggested changes that I have made. I also have the document here on the screen if we want to scroll through it so people can see what portion we're talking about. We can do that. I didn't have a lot of changes. We didn't have a lot of comments on it. I hope that these changes help clarify some of the questions that people had. I do want to point out that we do have an initial noise analysis that was prepared. It talked about existing noise impacts. What we will be preparing as a part of the EIR will be the future noise impacts, estimates of that based on, sort of the final version of the plan that comes out. We'll be looking at road capacity and other land uses to determine where we would expect to see noise creators, whatever the term is used, I'm drawing a blank. And then, there may be additional implementation measures that are created out of that. We will have future noise contour lines along major roadways and other noise generators that would help us in determining future land use and also any policies related to noise, how it would affect future development. But that will sort of fall out of the EIR process, and the final version of the plan will reflect that information and any changes that we might make at that point. Any questions you have of me?
Any questions of Peter?
On the introduction or on,
We're moving on to
Well,
noise.
I don't know if you want to go through it in pieces. We can talk about
What
the
introduction?
text of it first. We can then go into the goals and policies, and maybe we take it in manageable pieces. I don't.
Oh,
Okay, so we're having a little tiny,
so we didn't have an introduction.
oh, no, we did, here it is.
So this is the new. It was attached to your staff report from last week or the week before.
I should keep moving then.
Yes. So the recommended edits include sort of the underline and strikeout, mostly new text that I've added to help clarify some of the issues and address concerns raised by the public.
Oh, thank you.
It's attachment 1 to the staff report.
I've got it. I was too far ahead of myself. So, shall we, you just want to dig in kind of like, we did with the introduction and go through it? Little section by section?
I think you might be able to get through introduction, organization, background, and the one goal. Maybe that's a bite that we could take that's not too big or too small.
And from my notes, he's correct.
Sure. Well, the goal is,
Yeah.
kind of attached to
Yeah.
all of the policies, maybe just the introduction organization sections, page and a half there. So are there any, and we have an
let's see.
addition from Peter.
Can you, Peter, explain to me the effect of the right to farm ordinance?
Where's that? Is that in here somewhere?
It's the middle of the paragraph, first paragraph under background and setting.
So the right to farm ordinance is an ordinance that we have on the books right now that essentially allows an agricultural user to utilize normal agricultural activities. Noise generation to scare away birds, early morning tractor use, things that would be considered noisy to a residential neighborhood. And the purpose is to protect that agricultural use from nuisance complaints that often occur as we start the encroachment of residential development into agricultural lands. So we have an active farm or ranch. They're
Roosters crowing?
Roosters crowing. They're shooting off zone guns to keep the birds from eating all the fruit, and the neighbors aren't complaining about that. And it's happens around the country, and different jurisdictions, including ours, has adopted an ordinance that says that if you move in next to a farm, you expect to have some noise, you expect to have some dust, some nuisance issues that are normally associated with ag production. That it's always beautiful to put your house next to the vineyard until they start spraying.
Right.
And so the right to farm ordinance is intended to protect that viable agricultural operation from having to fight constant nuisance complaints.
That, in the real estate industry, is a disclosure for anybody and everybody buying in this county that they have to sign. It doesn't even matter if you're next to a farm or not. It is, everybody signs it.
Good,
You
now we just need
understand
a
it's a
right to fly an
farm.
airplane ordinance.
No.
The bullet point down, the first bullet point under associated plans and documents, we don't have any freeways, so I would suggest we just, I don't know if we need and freeways in there. And up to that point, that's all I have.
Well, I have a question. Down at the bottom of page 1, the first bullet point has a parenthetical that identifies where this information came from, general plan background report, but it really doesn't, because the background report doesn't have anything about noise. Instead, it's in this Calaveras County Council of Governments background noise measurements document that was prepared by J.C. Brennan and Associates. So just in terms of accuracy, if somebody goes to general background report, they won't find this stuff. And that shows up in the first bullet point, second
It's
bullet
attachment
point.
A in the background report. We can be more specific as to where that can be located.
It's actually attachment B. so
Attachment B.
maybe
So maybe make that clear where they can find that.
Did you just say that the background report includes the report that Mr. Wooster just referred to?
Attachment B.
Yes.
Present it does,
Oh, it's
Yes,
attached?
attachment B.
It's an attachment?
Okay.
B, and it's part of this one.
So I think it would be helpful to specify if we,
Okay.
since we
So it
can-
would read, then the parenthetic statement would read general plan background report, attachment B, and include the title if you want to?
Yeah.
So everything with respect to noise that's from the background report is from that particular attachment?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other? I actually had one in the introduction. It says, "A noise element is intended to maintain the rural atmosphere that attracts visitors and residents." Well, I'd like to see visitors, comma, residents, and businesses.
That's good.
Good for me.
All right. So moving along to the goals and policies. I'd like to make one comment on the goal. Instead of saying county noise levels, it sounds like the county's producing them. Is just say noise levels consistent with the county's rural atmosphere?
That's good.
Makes sense.
You know, what sentence are you on, please?
The first goal.
Goal.
And then also, and protect the health and well-being of
Oh.
residents again, residents, businesses and visitors, something like that. I don't think you need to say county again, but add businesses. That would be my recommendation on the goal statement.
Good job.
I'm good with that as well.
Okay.
We're in policies, correct?
Yes, we
We're
are.
including that.
Uh-huh.
I'm okay with the 1.1, although I want to later talk about the tables themselves. And maybe that can wait until, I mean, tables 1 and 2 appear everywhere. We can talk about them now, or we can.
When we go through the language of the policy.
Let's
Yes.
go, okay, the language is okay with, on 1.1. With 1.2, I have a question, and for my edification, what do you mean by land use review process in that sentence?
That would be the processing of development applications. And maybe we just state that.
Okay, so when we talk about noise, is there a noise review, is noise included in the review process for all projects, or is there a list that triggers you to look at the noise component?
It's any discretionary project is subject to our review for impacts from or from noise.
Okay,
And we will use our discretion to determine whether or not a noise analysis is required, based on, there's going to be, is it a noisy proposed use or not? Is it something that's going to generate a lot of traffic, that's going to create traffic noise? There's a judgment call that's used. So not every project requires an analysis of noise.
and then
But
not
when we
even every,
believe that there is a potential impact, then we will do that.
okay, but it's with respect to, so it's a subset of discretionary projects?
Yes.
Okay, so I would like to see that referred to just with respect to discretionary projects, because you're all other projects, you're not even going there.
Not necessarily true, because there are noise standards that apply regularly on ministerial projects. For example, you have to do certain noise, you have to meet certain noise standards for residential structures.
Okay, so, and they're written into code somewhere, aren't they?
They're written into code somewhere, yes. I'm thinking out loud here whether or not by limiting the policy to discretionary projects only, that may somehow constrain the county in implementing other programs that we might need to do to protect the health of
Sure.
the public.
Sure, but in the example that you gave with respect to a residential construction, somebody's building a house, they've got a contractor, and the contractor has to follow county ordinances. He can't be running his nail gun at 11 o'clock at night, right? That would be, there was something in there about that.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's not part of a review process. This talks about review process. That's not a review process. That's simply an ordinance that they need to follow, and if they're a licensed contractor, they know what that ordinance is, or should.
One of the things that arises also is, let's say you had a mine come in and you put some requirements on it. You're done with the review process. 10 years down the road, they begin to violate your noise levels. That's not during the review process. So if that policy would need to reflect the ability of the county on an ongoing basis to address noise issues outside of the review process. Does that make sense?
I might catch up to you on your logic here. Evaluate the potential impacts of noise on and from existing and planned land uses, and public and private transportation facilities during the land use review process using noise thresholds. Well, okay. I see this as a very general sort of bullet point because it just talks about evaluating something. So if by that you mean on an well, not ongoing, that the county will, I'm having a hard time translating this into layman's terms, and by the way, that's one of our goals in the general plan, isn't it?
So maybe it needs a little more understanding of how noise is applied. There's two types of noise that's typically monitored or calculated, stationary noise and transportation noise sources. And so the first policy, and it's really to establish, these two policies are intended to establish tables 1 and 2 as the noise standards for the county. And maybe there's a simpler way to say that.
Oh, that's what it does? It just sets up tables 1 and 2 as the standards to be followed?
Yeah.
Guys, we had different college profs. Okay.
So there would be two ways that this policy would be applied. One would be through the review of projects, because we're talking about transportation noise levels. The other one would be for county projects, because we're doing a county road project. The county would need to also meet its own standards for if we're, designing a road, we're going to design it so that it meets the standards set forth in the transportation noise tables. Maybe we just strike that during the land use review process phrase, and it says we're going to use these tables.
Yes, facilities and then go to using.
Yeah.
Does that whole process starts over there at the desk where people check in and start the permitting process? That's where this evaluation takes place, for the most part.
In the instance where it's a development project, yes, they submit their application. We say, okay, this looks like it may have an effect on noise because of the use or the scale of it. You need to do a noise study. We need to make sure that you're not violating our standards for noise as a part of your development project. I don't think this is something that would necessarily apply to a ministerial project. And typically, the general plan policies don't apply to ministerial projects. They would apply to the creation of ordinances that would then apply to, so if we say we're going to create an ordinance to adopt noise standards, then it would potentially apply to ministerial projects. So we're going to adopt certain standards that would apply on any building permit. Then we would go back to our general plan. What's the general plan say as far as what should be in that ordinance? But I think this is fairly focused intent of this policy to say we're going to evaluate transportation projects and projects that would affect roads for the effect of the noise generated by traffic on the project or the project itself. Have I just confused things even more?
Well,
No.
before you mentioned two types of noise, stationary and transportation. Is that really what you mean to say when you say land uses and public and private transportation facilities? If you said from, first line, from stationary and transportation noises, and then using noise thresholds set forth in tables 1 and 2, does that complete the thought? Am I making this too hard? Am I digging, maybe I'm going too deep in the onion here, maybe.
Maybe.
Okay.
And maybe the part of the confusion is we refer to both noise tables 1 and 2 in this policy, and really it's only table 1, because table 2 is the stationary sources.
Well, this NOI 1.2 says evaluate the potential impacts of noise on and from existing and planned land uses and public and private transportation facilities, et cetera. So isn't it working both ways? In other words, the word on there implied to me that you would not only evaluate the impact from something that's new, but you were going to evaluate the impact on something that's already
But I don't
there.
know how you would have an impact on a transportation facility. Transportation facilities aren't a noise-sensitive use.
Well,
But you would on existing and planned land uses.
On the,
I think you do have, I think you do have impacts on.
Yes, you
Because
certainly do.
the on refers to the fact that if you're making too much noise, we're going to have to do something about that. There's going to be some mitigation involved. So the impact on,
you're right, that's right.
okay?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, well, so it makes sense in that context. I don't know. What were you saying about table 2 is not involved?
Well, if this is intended to...
Stationary. So this does not refer to both stationary and transportation related.
It's transportation noise. I guess it would, no, it does affect both stationary and transportation.
Well,
I think if we just, I think that if we strike the phrase during the land use review process, that it covers it.
okay.
It's a broad range of changes that says essentially that these are the tables we will use for evaluating noise impacts.
In that case, I would be ready to move on. But I don't have any questions until 1.13, so maybe somebody else has something else in the meantime.
I'm good with the revision on 1.2, and I don't have any further on that page.
I do have some questions. 1.3 and 1.4 both start off saying, determine that a potentially significant adverse noise-related impact exists, and then it goes on. So my questions are, what is the source of that language, and what is the significance of it? I mean, why does it matter if you make those kind of determinations?
That establishes a threshold that's typically used in CEQA to evaluate when some type of mitigation is necessary. So the threshold, it's establishing the threshold, and if we say, okay, you're exceeding the threshold, then we need to apply some measure to reduce it down to the level, an acceptable level.
So it's CEQA related?
It's CEQA related, yeah.
Okay, next question is, in 1.3, it says that whether you have the potential to increase the overall ambient noise levels at the receiving land use by 3 dB or more, et cetera. But when you go to the J.C. Brennan document, it says outside the laboratory, a 3 dBA change is considered a just perceivable difference. And so I'm wondering, what's the justification for the 3 dB here?
Because it is the minimum threshold that you would, because it's the minimum threshold at which you would even be able to notice that there was a change in noise. And the key there is that you only use that after it's exceeded what would normally be a normal standard. So basically you take the background noise, and if the background noise is already high, and then you increase it by 3 dB, then it's potentially, not necessarily, significant. Whereas if it's a quiet neighborhood and you raise it by 3, this actually doesn't apply because the noise levels don't already exceed table 2. So in other words, you have to tie it to what it already sounds like in the background and look at those table 2 noise levels. And it's not until you already have something that's noisy and make it noisier that then kicks in.
So 1.2 only kicks in an environment where the noise level standard is already exceeded. The noise level standards in Table 2 are already exceeded. Is that what you're saying?
1.3, we're saying that when the ambient noise levels, that's what it already sounds like, exceed the standards in Table 2, then 1.3 kicks in. If you increase it by 3 decibels.
And in the context, then a 3 dB increase is,
There you go.
it may be significant.
May.
May or may not be.
Correct. Noise is one of the worst technical elements. It's just
I'm still having
inherently-
trouble with this, because let's assume the place is already noisy. In other words, your ambient noise levels exceed the standards set forth in tables. Now, you're saying that if you jump it up a barely perceptible bit, in other words, 3 dB, you trigger all of this CEQA stuff, right?
You've already triggered CEQA. Now you're trying to decide if you need to do mitigation or not. And this says you might need to if it goes up another 3. You might not need to, but this says that if it goes up 3 more decibels, because the human ear can in fact perceive that, and it's already noisy, you need to look at it more closely. You may determine, drop in the bucket. Or is this the straw that breaks the camel's back? You know, you don't know until you actually evaluate it. CEQA would have already kicked in. Whether or not it's a significant impact or not is what you're trying to determine on 1.3.
Okay.
Does our counties, either environmental health or code compliance or whoever, do they have the equipment and the trained personnel to determine these things?
No. The sheriff's office has some noise meters, and they will use that in dealing with complaints, file of noise complaints, but we don't have anyone on staff that normally does this kind of noise analysis. It would have to be something that the applicant would hire a consultant to deal with.
So based upon what you've just said here, isn't the second word that, shouldn't that be whether? You're asking yourself a question here, right?
Well, I think what we're saying is the county is going to determine that if it's a potentially, not we're going to determine, I mean, we have to do that anyway. This is a threshold that we're establishing. A 3 decibel increase over the ambient level, if it's already above the threshold we've established, or the standard we've established, we've determined that it is a significant impact. We have to address, as Amy pointed out, we have to address noise from a CEQA perspective. This puts it into the general plan, saying these are our general plan standards, as well as you have to analyze it from a CEQA perspective. But these are the standards that we're adopting from a general plan perspective that we have determined are appropriate for our rural community.
Based upon comparisons with what other rural communities have in fact set as their standards, and based upon what noise analysts indicate to us should be the standard. Right now we have no standard, hence there's not a predictability, if you will, for a developer when they come in. They don't know when they may or may not trigger.
It might help me to understand it better if you could point to the implementation program it is linked to.
It's really sort of a self-implementing policy.
Does it have a specific program?
I take that back. Noise 1-B would help implement it.
Did you say 1B isn't bigger?
Noise -1-B, Uniform Noise Management Standards. So basically, if you trigger this and you say, yep, you're increasing that noise too loud, this program would then say, and we already know what you need to do, increase your insulation. that type of thing. And these things are already established as to how you're going to address the CEQA issue if you trigger it.
Okay, there's another phrase here that I'm curious about in 1.3 and 1.4, where we're going to determine that a potentially significant adverse noise-related impact, blah, 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 has the potential to increase, or has the potential to do one or more of the following. Is that CEQA language too, or could we say something like is predicted to, or is determined to? Because lots of things have a potential to do other things. Or is this sort of magic CEQA language that we can't tinker with?
Well, this is general plan language, although it's probably taken from CEQA to some degree. We're not tied to this language. I don't know that there's anything as far as term of art that this phrase we have to use that.
Okay, last one, under NOI 1.4, last bullet point says where existing traffic noise levels are greater than 65 dBl at the outdoor activity areas of noise sensitive uses, a plus 1.5 dBl increase, blah, 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 will be considered significant. But I thought that until you got to plus 3, you couldn't even tell it. So why is 1.5 here?
1.3 is for non-transportation. Oh, did I do that backwards?
3.
1.3 is for non-transportation projects. 1.4 is for transportation projects.
No, but what he's talking
Whoops,
about is
sorry.
down here. Why is 1.5 decibel?
When 3 is barely audible.
3 decibel change.
Oh, regardless. Gotcha.
Why would it make a difference in the significance of an increase in sound, whether it was transportation or non-transportation related?
Excellent question.
I'm sorry, could you put the microphone a little closer to you?
I want to make sure you get that on tape. Excellent question. We're
I
following.
wanted you to repeat it. That's why I was
We're
using an
following
excuse.
some standards, and you have a very legitimate question as to why on earth would we care about 1.5 when you can't perceive it. That's something I'd have to
Wouldn't that
research
have
for
to
you.
do with how long it lasts?
This,
No.
again, not being a noise expert, my understanding is most of these readings actually do look at how long it lasts. They demand that you use, I think they call it CNEL, which basically takes it into account over a 24-hour period. So this actually should reflect that. But that might be the issue. I honestly will have to check with the engineer on that.
The
And then
comparison,
the difference between why we address transportation noise differently than stationary noise. I don't know, Amy, do you know the answer to that question? It's just,
They get regulated differently. I mean, you mitigate them differently.
Going
And they-
back to what Mr. Wooster asked, are these necessary CEQA breakdowns of a noise element, that you have to have these policies that relate specifically to stationary and then separate policies that relate specifically to transportation?
It is the standard practice to separate them because you do mitigate them differently, you do handle them differently, and there are different standards for them. So
Okay, and is that where the 1.5 came from? It came from a
Well-
transportation standard?
it came from a best management practice that noise engineers have conveyed to us would be the best standard to use. And I realize it has something to do with the fact that you've got 65 decibels already.
It's already loud.
And getting any louder than that becomes problematic. But your question about only 1.5 increase, why isn't it 3? I can't answer. Are these best management practices under CEQA? Yes. Are they best management practices from the engineer's standpoint who does the noise studies? Yes. Are you asking, does it have to be expressed exactly this way in the general plan?
Well, my first goal is to get my brain around the numbers and what they mean. And I understand that when you have a high level, an increase in it becomes significant. okay? But as a percentage, 1.5 against 65 is nothing. So the human ear is not going to detect that. A dog is going to know the difference, but not us.
I agree, and honestly, I'm going to have to double check because this came from Caltrans, a Caltrans standard. Enough said. So we need to double check as to why they would consider that significant. It is likely tied to a funding source. There are federal standards and state standards that get used, but I don't want to speculate further. I do need to do some research on that one.
And we're looking at the numbers that you've provided us here and the 1.1 through 1.7 and on that we're addressing here. I'm looking at these decibels. I'm looking at the chart you've provided us, the color-coded chart.
No, that's not hers.
Who provided this? South Reading 6-lane project. Who gave
This
us?
was offered by Vicki Reinke, because she had to leave,
Okay.
and she had pulled it from Caltrans, so she...
Okay. But looking at these numbers, looking at an email that we received this morning with somebody wanting us to pay particular attention to the decibels that are in this chart and how low they are. They own a small business office and they tested their office at 50. Well, they're already out of compliance.
At 50?
My office would be out of compliance.
At 50, I don't think anything,
You've got 35, 45, where do you have this? Daytime?
You're talking about interior spaces.
they tested
Interior
it-
spaces.
They tested their interior space and it was 50.
And they said it was not with a scientific machine, it was some sort of an app that they used.
On their phone.
Okay,
But seriously,
said, huh?
I can see, it's not enough said, because this is a huge decision that we're making today based on these numbers. Because you, in a normal person wanting to opening a new business, all they have to do is be 3 decibels off the chart, which you can't even tell the difference in sound, and you've sparked $1 bazillion for them to spend in a year to get open by doing extra mitigations.
I should start by saying, as an example, when you go from 60 to 70 decibels, you have doubled the amount of sound.
Okay, so what would a typical logging truck driving through a residential neighborhood where I live be on a chart?
Are they on their brakes?
But see, you don't take a one-time reading. You have to take it over a 24-hour period and average it. That's what these numbers are referring to. That person may have taken that reading when a truck went by, and in which case, it still is fine. That's a spike.
Okay, where
We
did
don't care
this
about
chart
that.
come from? This came from, and the numbers that you're giving us in the policies, these numbers are coming from where? What rural counties are these numbers? Where's an example of where you're getting this?
Tuolumne County uses these same numbers.
Okay.
I can get you, I also looked at Yellow County, I also looked at, I don't know what,
They're very
Juneau.
familiar to El Dorado counties. They're pretty standard numbers.
Pretty standard.
I think that there's a misunderstanding of how those are applied. The interior noise level is what would be affected by exterior noise sources, not what's happening inside. So if they have a very busy, loud office going on, it's the impact of one use on another that's the issue.
Okay, so concerts, you're telling me wouldn't be rated unless it went on for over 24 hours?
We have individual, we would have in our noise ordinance a maximum level that you could reach.
Okay.
And that's a problem that you have in dealing with things like concerts or overflight of airplanes and those kinds of things. They're intermittent. You might, especially with concerts, you have 2 hours of loud noise, and then for a month there's nothing. So how do you average that? So you have to address it somewhat differently. But when you're looking at a constant noise source, such as a roadway, such as a industrial use, then that's where these standards come into play.
Okay, but we're addressing other things in here besides just when I'm looking at this, we're not looking at just standard use. We're looking at things and we're giving ratings or making suggestions based on something like a concert, something that is temporary.
However, that's why on noise 1-B,
Okay?
look at the second bullet, you have to treat single event type noise issues separately.
Okay, so say right now we have our concerts in the parks that go on throughout the county. When they ask for an events permit for the summer, we don't address the noise levels when they're getting their events permit at that point in time. But with this, we're going to be saying your decibels for that concert can't exceed a certain number. Are we going to be doing that?
No,
We could, and I think that we should when we're looking at places of proposing, different outdoor venues where there's potential noise. Typically, the noise is not, from a concert in the park or something like that, it's not a problem. It's not an issue. Most people recognize that, that happens in parks. It happens in town squares, that there's going to be events outside that generate noise occasionally. It's when those uses are constantly generating noise to the point where people can't sleep at night, or they're adversely affected, their health is adversely affected because it's been documented that noise can create health problems. That's the issue that we're looking at. So the occasional concert, the occasional event is not the issue. It's the constant noise from different activities that go on all the time. And it could be, it's up and down. And that's why the community noise equivalent level, CNEL, which is the measurement that's used, is a weighted average. It's averaged over a period of time, and it's weighted so that nighttime noise has a heavier impact than daytime noise. Because people want peace and quiet at night. They're trying to sleep. Daytime noise can be louder.
Okay, so the way that we read this, Peter, is, it's a little bit convoluted to understand, no matter how many times you sit here and read the same sentence over and over again. But the plain language that you just used in stating that, well, at nighttime in different levels, if you could get more plain language into this document, so as we're reading through it, all we have to do is read those first two things you just stated, and it would make far more sense to everybody, because we've had to ask a lot of questions to drag those two statements out of you that made everything make sense.
So it sounds like there needs to be some better explanation in the introduction.
In my opinion.
We do have, some of those terms are defined, all those terms are defined in the glossary, but I think that noise is a very technical issue that we need a better explanation, and we can work on that.
And not just for the purpose of understanding the element, but for purposes of a look back. A problem arises and someone interprets the problem one way, you can say, no, 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 no. Look back at this statement here. This was not intended to mean what you say it was meant. You say it means. So I appreciate what Lisa has been able to accomplish here, and I think that it starts with some plain language perspectives on the issue.
The language that you used, if you could just repeat yourself, Peter, would be great.
You
can watch the video later.
It's a good thing it's on tape.
Right?
Well, I'm still curious where these numbers are coming from in these two tables, because we did get an email from Alan McElree, and apparently we have a noise ordinance that has different numbers in it, and they are more permissive numbers.
I was looking at that here.
And so where are these numbers that you're proposing coming from, and why are they better than what we already have?
The numbers that are used in your ordinance are not what's called CNEL, which Peter just explained. They're not over time. At least that's my reading of it. And that's over time.
Well, what else would they be?
I'm looking for my copy of that one.
Okay, you're using two different.
Can you read that?
You're choosing two different standards.
But I thought there was a table. There was a table that was offered,
There is.
and I'm looking for that right now.
You actually have broken, instead of having one average, you actually break them apart. You don't have an average every 24 hours. You use a 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. and a 10 p.m. to 7 a.m.
Darn it, David.
And this is fun.
Are you talking about that through an email, or are you talking about the
Yeah,
chart?
I'm talking about what Kelly's talking about.
Okay, on this email,
He was talking about the ordinance, which I've read, and I've seen the table of it. It only has 3 categories and a couple of different,
do you have that one?
No, not with me.
I went online, I printed it out from the county's website, and now I don't have it. What a dummy.
Do you have a copy of the noise ordinance here?
There it is. There it is. This is what I'm referring to. Table 1 in the noise ordinance.
Exterior noise level standards?
Correct.
Table on top, yeah. And so
Okay.
those are the thresholds
Is that what you
for
looked at?
noise complaints and violations.
Email.
Yeah, we're looking at the email.
Okay, well, this is the actual ordinance. 3 categories: residential, commercial, industrial. That's under land use type. And then, sure enough, you've got a sort of a daytime, nighttime breakdown with 5 to 10 decibel difference between the residential, commercial, and industrial. Naturally, it goes up. It's a very simple table to understand. Are you saying that these decibel levels are not, they don't have the same algebraic formula that tables 1 and 2 use, because there's no time factor?
Well, it's hard to know because it doesn't state how that is measured. But typically, this is what the sheriff will go out and say, we'll do a reading, which is not an average. It's here's the threshold.
How loud is that party?
How loud is that party going on right now?
Right.
You're exceeding the noise level, shut her down.
Okay.
Which is different than, the planning aspect of what's going to be the long-term impact of this project on noise.
So type 902 is for violations and the sheriff's department, whereas the general plan was intended to evaluate land uses and transportation.
I believe the two should conform with each other.
I kind of like to correlate the table in the ordinance with the table here, and what I can see that's the same is the word residential. Okay, so now you've got an outdoor residential activity and an interior space. You've just said, Amy, that interior means sound coming from the outside affecting the interior. Okay.
I said that, yes.
Right. So this weighted, in Table 1 of the proposed element, the weighted average is 45. Happens to be this, well, that's the day, okay, daytime. This does not distinguish between daytime and nighttime. I don't know if that's a problem, but
It does, if you switch tables.
really?
Yeah, they've got it right here.
So that's
They've got
traffic
the
noise.
Oh, that's Table 2.
Table 1 is transportation noise
Oh.
sources. Table 2 is stationary noise sources.
Okay, and stationary noise levels, you've only got, you don't have any category breakdowns, you just, everything's the same. Whereas in the ordinance, which makes some sense to me, is that in the commercial and industrial zones, you would necessarily have a higher thresholds.
Correct, as is the case, well, you gotta look at it. The industrial equivalent in Table 1, I would argue, is playgrounds and neighborhood parks, which is 70.
Oh, but I thought we were looking at 2 because it's stationary.
Oh, if you have industrial, sorry.
Okay, so I'm looking at Table 2A,
Yes,
and there's no categories.
right. So in other words, the general plan being less restrictive than your zoning
No, it's more
ordinance.
restrictive.
No, more
No, it's the
restrictive.
other way. It's more
Because
restrictive.
in the code, you've got commercial and industrial zones with the different allowable amounts. But going back to, which I think we need to talk about, but I want to go back to the weighted, the table 1 in the code is a weighted average. And in fact, it corresponds exactly with the weighted averages listed in table 2A of the proposed element, at least in the residential. So
You are requesting more substantiation as to why these numbers versus any other number.
well, one question, and everybody else can add to this list of questions. One question is, why was table 2A proposed for the noise element when it is significantly different and more restrictive than the table 1 of the noise ordinance, and the noise ordinance is only 3 years old?
So the noise ordinance is a top threshold, where the general plan, table 2, is an average.
Well,
So if we have them the same, then any time you exceed the average, you're violating the noise ordinance.
okay, I remember you're saying that the meter reads the party and it's too loud, but the sound level in this table 1 of the ordinance says it's a weighted,
It's A-weighted, which is a way to calculate it. The definition of A-weighting in the glossary reads, a frequency response adjustment of a sound level meter that conditions the output signal to approximate human response. So it's a technical way to adjust the meter so it reflects what you're hearing. So there are certain sounds you can't hear that the meter's going to pick up. By A-weighting it approximates what your ear hears.
It's not giving
Oh.
us over time.
okay.
It's not a
So
time
the
sensitive.
parenthetic statement, A-weighted, means human equivalent,
Right,
human ear algorithm.
yes.
Right now.
Okay. I understand. Now, why would not table 2A have a breakdown at least similar to the ordinance with respect to locations?
You can.
We might want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, typically, we're looking at
How could you not?
noise-sensitive receptors on these kinds of, we're not worried about an industrial use affecting another industrial use. So the industrial use that might affect a hospital or residential use. But I think that breaking this down further into different types of uses is probably a good idea.
I think it's a great idea because I can see some serious complications coming out of this. This is something that can stop business if it's too restrictive.
This
I
is all
don't-
at the receiving end, right?
Yes.
And the receiving end, I think, is defined, I'm sorry, Lisa, I cut you off.
You always do.
I know. But the receiving end is defined as the property boundary of the receiving location,
Right.
which I have a problem with as well. Because the property boundary might be a great distance from where the humans are on that property, or typically where the humans are on that property.
So one of the areas in here, Peter, that I read about was trucks going through residential neighborhoods. Okay? One of the bases of our general plan is our heritage and this, that, and the other. Well, logging trucks is our heritage. Logging trucks run through our residential streets. Yes, they have the ability to do that, but for each project that they apply to work on, so let's just say, let me use Blake Springs and Arnold for an example. They're going to be doing reforestation in a 300-foot perimeter around. They're not cutting down trees, they're doing a perimeter. That's going to be running those chainsaws, trucks, hauling, things like that all through that subdivision. Is that something that's going to have to require permitting through you, and would that shut down that project?
No.
Why not?
It doesn't require a permit from the county to do that.
Really?
Not that I'm aware of.
Awesome.
So again, we're looking at long-term sort of programmatic, impacts associated with approval of a project, either at the county level or a private project that the county has to approve. So if we're putting in a major road that's going to have a lot of logging trucks on it in a neighborhood, then that's a problem. And that would be inconsistent with what we're saying is we want to protect the quietness of the residential neighborhood. Maybe
how
that's
would
not
the
the best
logging
location
truck
for the
run
road.
through there?
But the fact that a truck may occasionally go through a residential neighborhood, that one is probably not going to affect the overall CNEL because it's a 1 or 2 time event, average over 24 hours. You hear it for a moment and then it's gone. If, on the other hand, you put a lumber mill at the end of a residential street where there's trucks going in and out all day,
Okay, we have that.
that's a different story.
But we have that.
They're pre-existing.
Okay, so nobody's going to be able to point to this and say, hey, I want a decibel meter put up, and that business is way too much traffic and it's way too loud, and we're not going to shut down business over that because of this language, because that's how I read this right now.
We would not require that an existing use.
But if they changed any single thing about their business and they come to you to renew their permit, the way that this is written is all of a sudden now it qualifies, right?
If they were to expand their operation
Expand.
beyond what's already permitted,
Mm-hmm.
then they would be subject to whatever standards we have in place.
And just because they exceed it does not mean they cannot do it. It means that they might have to have things like, okay, go ahead and do that, but cut it off at 10 o'clock at night. Or whatever you can do to work.
God, when I read through this and I read, oh, you got to mitigate your sound by building sound barriers and walls on freeways and roads, I'm like, are you kidding? This is Calaveras County. I mean,
There's many ways.
well, to mitigate that and have people that are trying to do business in our county mitigate at those extremes, and when they get to the front desk and the cost of applying to do something goes from a $3,500 fee to $15,000 because they now have to hire specialists to come in and do this test and do that test, we're just continuing to choke ourselves out. I mean, obviously I don't want to live next door to anything that's going to be brutal. I do, but I don't want to. I can move anytime I want. I want to be respectful of other people and their rights as well, but I don't want us to be so restrictive that we become more unfriendly. I mean, that concerns me. If you're telling me that Tuolumne County is using these numbers in El Dorado County,
Yes.
obviously they have a lot more industry than we do. That's a little bit encouraging. But I want some finer language in here. I think that's what I want.
These numbers, is this irrespective of the frequency? Is this just volume? In other words, are the same rules for a high-pitched squeal as it is for a growl of a grizzly bear?
I don't know if the noise calculation
Or the tone is?
takes into account frequency. I don't believe so, but I'm not sure.
One thing from this discussion that it might be helpful is also in the introduction is a discussion about the relationship between the noise element and the noise ordinance.
They're very connected.
But I think there are distinct differences, and so I think even for the reader to understand, well, this is where the ordinance, because they both say noise, and they're both regulating noise, so just to establish the relationship between the two of them, I think would be helpful to the reader as well.
But if you're having an issue with somebody breaking these rules, they're going to send the sheriff out with the decibel reader.
There you go.
The two
Yeah.
have got to be connected. I mean, the sheriff can't do their job if our general plan backs it up in a whole different direction and vice versa.
One of the programs, first one, does talk about making sure the general plan and the noise ordinance use the same.
Right, are consistent.
But there is a reason why the noise standards are different.
Right.
Because they're
One's
measuring different things.
averaged over a time period, one
others are
is,
maximum.
yes. Yeah, and that kind of just the discussion in the intro, just how you use both, I think would be helpful.
Do I understand that the comparison of the ordinance table with 2A, where the commercial and industrial categories were eliminated, it's because you're targeting the most sensitive receptor, residential neighborhood, and by not including commercial and industrial, you are in effect saying commercial and industrial as receptors, not producers, as receptors, we don't care so much about. They can live with the noise.
One way to put it, yes.
Now, okay. So Amy was saying it's less restrictive
Incorrect.
because it doesn't have those categories in there for consideration. 2A is being less restrictive than the ordinance because the categories are absent. Because you're saying, by them being absent, you're saying, we're not going to go to a commercial site or an industrial site and read the noise levels that are coming from the outside, because they ain't coming from the outside, they're coming from the inside, if anywhere.
Well, I think that we should add standards for commercial, at least commercial, maybe some specified.
Commercial, I think, is valid.
Or at least we make a statement in there that says that these only apply to these noise-sensitive uses, residential and whatever other ones we want to include in that.
Because
schools or hospitals or, things like that.
Yeah, or a restaurant that's next to a nightclub or something like that. Where
Yeah, and you've raised some questions about the ordinance itself. It doesn't make it clear as Table 2A, neither one makes it clear that one has to do with what noise you're being exposed to, as opposed to, I'm guessing, in the noise ordinance, what the industrial use is creating versus what I'm being exposed to from that noise source.
I don't know that there's there's not a footnote there, but
because basically, if I'm in industrial use and I'm producing 75 decibels, that's one thing. But if I'm in a house somewhere down the road from it, and I'm receiving more than 55 or 45 or what have you, it's two different things. One's producing, and I don't know if that's the case on Table 1 in the noise ordinance. It sort of looks that way, but this is about the noises they are producing as opposed to noise exposure, what you're receiving from the station.
okay. Can we agree that where the general plan might address, will be addressing noise that has this weighted average? It's not a moment in time. That's the limit of the general plan noise considerations. Whereas the ordinance is interested in the noise of the moment. And should it not also be interested separately in the noise over time, because that's what the element is talking about? I mean, you have to have we're going to be talking about ordinances that as implementation measures for our noise goals.
Actually,
how you do it. You may end up with two different standards, one for right now for the sheriff's department and one for applications that you process for new use.
well, that noise ordinance was put together over lake noise down at Copperopolis. We didn't have a noise ordinance in this county until the Copperopolis issue was starting to rear up. And that was brought forward from Lake Tulloch.
Outboard motors, boat motors.
No,
parties.
parties and vacation
Oh,
rentals.
parties.
And they were trying to find a way to restrict, so they put the noise ordinance in place. And then they decided that wasn't good enough, even though they didn't give a chance to work. And they went into putting in restrictions on the vacation rentals and permitting fees.
Oh, well,
And you certainly don't want to take something that has that origin and start applying it to new development.
I
You
might.
don't want to take those standards and apply it to new development. You want something that's a little more appropriate to new developments, not to parties on Lake Tulloch, which is your noise ordinance. You
So,
want a different standard.
so we've got a whole table here. Chairman McLaughlin,
Yes?
that we are obviously spinning circles around with our conversation and not making any progress. Can you bring us back to some sort of
Perhaps I can
movement?
suggest an option that we can continue talking about some of the other language, the implementation measures, as well as any other policies that you have issues with. We will be bringing back to you, obviously we can't fix it all today.
Right.
So we'll be bringing back to you changes that help clarify some of these issues that have been brought up today.
That'd be fantastic, because before I would be willing to approve any of this, I want to see some clarity on all of this. That's my opinion.
Yeah,
I mean-
I think that makes sense. We can't fix it today. We need
Right.
to do some more research. We need to spend some time and craft some language that helps explain it in layman's terms of how this is applied and what it really means.
Would you put on your list of to-dos then, a look to see whether or not the ordinance needs to be added to more closely match the noise element? You would do that anyway, right? That
Well,
would be
we
the
have
norm-
implementation number 1 is to update the county noise ordinance.
For consistency with the general.
And then I think you need to purchase a decibel meter for code compliance. Because if we take this general plan and all this pressure comes down on our sheriff's department, I don't think they're going to be very happy with us when this is more of a code compliance issue, not a policing issue.
Well, I think that the general plan is not intended to be a code compliance issue.
Okay?
It's intended to address future development and how we will review that development when it comes through.
And how do we enforce it?
The enforcement issue, well, the enforcement, that would be through review of the projects and either conditions and mitigation measures or insurance that their plan works for us.
And it might include monitoring, an annual monitoring or something as a condition of approval. I'm just guessing, just some way that you would see that they're still in.
We don't even have the ability to do that.
No, we wouldn't be the applicant, the developer would be required.
Exactly, that has been
Right.
the usual, is if it's a large mining operation, Tuolumne County, they had to hire and pay for their own ongoing noise monitoring.
Okay, so if this is new construction, how do they prove to you what their decibels are without having a business existing?
They hire a consultant that knows how to project
modeling.
future is modeling. I mean, that's the best we can do.
The idea behind the whole thing is to prevent the conflicts from occurring again in the future as much as possible. And hopefully your land use map will already take care of that and you'll never have to use this.
So kind of cut them off at the pass.
Because you're not going to put a bunch of high-density residential right next to an industrial use on
We
your
already
land
have
use
that.
map.
We can't change that.
But
Correct.
we're talking the future.
But this isn't going to apply to existing.
Right.
It's going to apply to not
It
creating.
does apply to existing whenever they do any expansions.
If they do a
So you can't
significant
say it doesn't apply to
expansion.
existing. It applies to everybody in one way or another. True.
Yes, if you
Thank you.
expand it.
So with that, do we want to move on for some discussion about the implementation programs?
Before we're through with the first policy page, I think Mr. Wooster asked a good question about the origin of this 1.5 decibel increase, and we talked about that
We're gonna look into
already.
that and
So you're going to
figure
put
that
that on your,
That's on the
here's where it
list.
came from and here's why and all that? Okay, thank you.
Sure. There's what, 5, 6 of them?
So on 1.13, likely to produce excessive noise, is that the modeling that you just referred to? That's where that comes from? That's what determines likely?
Yes.
So in the real world, an applicant for a project comes to you with a plan. They come to us, or you first, and you say, well, you're going to have to be subject to a noise modeling effort, right?
Acoustical analysis, yes.
How would you know which projects you're going to flag for a noise model effort and which one's not? Is it going back to discretionary versus ministerial? It's not, is it?
Well, it'll be just discretionary projects. And what I'm trying to say by that is not every single discretionary project is going to have to do that. Those that are likely to create a noise.
So this is the judgment call that you go
Judgment
through?
call, yes.
Okay. And if the applicant says, Mr. Mauer was just wrong, he comes to us and says, Mr. Mauer is wrong, I don't need a modeling thing, here's why, then we go through that process.
I suppose that could
They-
happen, yes.
Okay?
Peter, I
Okay.
think that's the language I'm looking for, so that we know it's not going to apply to ministerial projects, only discretionary whenever it is something that could have a noise boundary issue. So if that could be in that language at the beginning, that would be important to me,
I agree.
because then there won't be any confusion on that down the road.
And if you want to include that ministerial projects are still subject to noise ordinance, to make sure that they know that they've got there's compliance that affects them as well, then you can slug that in there. What questions did we have about noise 1, table 1, if any?
We weren't going to answer any of these till we got answers back, and our chairperson moved us on to the implementation programs. And you
I just
took us
tried that.
back. You took us backwards
Yes.
again.
No, we're there.
No, you went back
I'm being
over
linear. How much more linear can I be?
You went back over here. We're over here now. Where are you at?
You can't just jump past my concern.
Our
really.
chairperson said...
Okay, now I'm ready for implementations.
So,
Just try to get ahead of me.
here you address on 1A is the relationship between the noise ordinance and the noise element. Addressing that there would be incorporation and the relation, showing the relationship between the two and making sure there's no conflict.
Correct.
Any discussion about that?
Say again, please.
Well, this is an implementation program that the county says it's going to do. As part of the noise element, that they are going to review the ordinance and make sure that there are applicable standards. I don't know, it's like something here about, maybe you should tell us about the affordable housing projects and why this specifically is called out, actually.
Yeah.
Because they have a different set of noise standards that you must follow when you are funded by a separate type of funding.
So HUD housing has a different standard.
Correct.
Are they allowed to be louder?
No. Yes, no. 65 sticks in my brain.
That's a lot louder.
I doubt it would be louder. I can double check that.
Let's see what our consistency is with that, because if we were consistent, there wouldn't be an issue to point out, right?
Correct.
Let's look at it.
I'm thinking it's more
Let's look at it.
restricted.
I tell you what, my guess is that it's louder because they want to allow counties to place HUD housing, Section 8 housing, in places where you wouldn't otherwise, no one would want to build a house.
I'm 90% sure you are correct.
So my question is, the first bullet is incorporate the noise standards established for non-transportation related noise pursuant to the California Noise Insulation Standards and the State Department of Health Services Office of Noise Control. Why is that important to be bulleted?
You mean, why do we have to say where they're coming from?
Why is that in there at all?
Yeah, why is it in here at all? I'm just not sure what the,
To
why?
You're pointing out that there's two different sets of standards, in effect, that you need to make sure that 902, that we explain, that you've got one set of standards for one purpose, and then you've got these other sets of standards.
So again, it's, you're describing the relationship between the ordinance and the element? Is that what you're?
We're pointing out that somebody may perceive an inconsistency and that we need to make it clear that there isn't one. That
The differences between the ordinance and the element, and they have different, they're two different animals.
They are two different
Right.
animals.
Okay.
The example being that the ordinance has the moment factor in mind, whereas the element has the broader time, longer time frame in mind. Right? And the incorporating means adding to the ordinance the relevant kinds of table information from the element, correct?
In this case, we have two, the third bullet is, implement the policies of the general plan. So anything we said in the general plan, we're going to add to our ordinance if it's appropriate to be in the ordinance. It doesn't mean that we're going to just put everything in the ordinance, but we're going to update the ordinance to make sure it's consistent. So if there's sound level changes, we need to do that. Again, the ordinance right now just addresses noise complaints. It doesn't address other things. What the first two bullets are, these are special standards that are established by the federal and state government for very specific purposes that we should have in our ordinance to make sure that there's not a conflict.
So, but if we said in the third bullet that we're going to be, implement everything in our noise element, which already includes those standards, doesn't it? Do we need to spell it out in the first bullet point?
We could have a much more general statement of include relevant requirements from state and federal programs.
And then you don't need the third bullet.
Well, we certainly
Yeah,
want
you
to say
still
that.
do.
Or just,
That's what I'm
exactly,
saying, just have the third bullet,
because everything else is incorporated into the element.
which includes the first bullet point.
So even first,
Second and third bullets would be all that you would
As long as
need.
you add that
Yes.
you include the state and federal standards.
Sure.
So basically, policies of general plan, noise element, and state and federal
Sure,
noise
yeah.
standards.
but there's three different tables sitting right there in bullet 1 and 2. You've got your California insulation standards, your State Department of Health Services standards, and then you have Housing and Urban Development standards. You've got 3 tables right there. Then you're going to add our 4th table. Then you need to add the 5th for the ordinance. That's stating 5 different tables in one spot. I want to see all 5 tables.
Those are not necessarily tables.
They are.
The first 3.
They're going to have standards, which is going to make them a table. Read it.
Well, I'm,
Standards. They want the standards.
it doesn't have, okay.
Are those tables available, Amy?
We can make them available. The reason I'm hesitating is I believe that the table we have in the general plan is in fact for non-transportation related noise is actually an aggregate of those noise insulation, State Department of Health Services noise standards. But yes, we'll get all of those for you to look at
It'd be fun to look at
in
all of them and
comparison.
see what, I mean, because if they're all pretty consistent with each other, we can feel better about the decision that we're
Gotcha.
making. If they're all over the board, I think we need to look at this bigger picture.
They should be pretty close.
Okay.
On the first bullet point, it refers to incorporating the noise standards pursuant to the California Noise Installation Standards and the State Department of Health Services Office of Noise Control. Are those mandatory? Does the county have to follow those?
I don't know, I believe so, and it applies on certain things, not everything. And I think that the point of this is that we just need to make sure that our ordinance is consistent with state and federal requirements. And I think that if we more generally refer to that in this implementation measure, that as we update that ordinance, we double check these other requirements. These were specifically listed, they came from the consultant.
Then why can't we have one bullet point that says exactly what you said right now?
We can.
I'm all for it. Here we go. That's
So
the
it'll
Lisa's
be
point where if we
update-
talk about it long enough, pretty soon we get to the plain language.
So we don't need any bullets at all. We'll just say to update the Calaveras County Code, Chapter 902, to implement the policies of general plan noise element and incorporate appropriate state and federal standards.
And everything else gets crossed
Perfect.
out.
I like that. I still want to see the tables.
My only concern is whether or not we're going to come up with tables in the noise element that are not consistent with or the same as these mandatory state standards. And so,
That's why I want to see those standards.
Well,
I
it
don't
could
know
be
if
that
we
a
even
state
need any
standard may
tables.
have a lower threshold for a certain use.
Such as the federal house allowing an exception. But you can take the general standard, one standard, and do a footnote if you have to, or to show that exception.
I'm going to drive to Tuolumne County now and stand everywhere and go like this. I want to make sure those noises work.
I'm gonna put Jake brakes on my car
24
and
hours,
pull up to
I
your
can get an
place.
idea of how bad it is.
So uniform noise management standards. Maybe you can,
1B.
yes,
Run
1B.
1B,
Yeah, 1B. I think we kind of pretty much covered 1A. So, but maybe there's you guys could provide a little background about why we need to do this.
I like that. That's what he should be starting out all of this with. When I was saying explanations here, that one right there almost explains it all.
One of the purposes is to provide predictability, so that if you do exceed one of the noise standards and it is determined to be potentially significant, you know what you're up against. You know that, oh, this isn't going to cost me $100 million. I just have to be aware that maybe I'm going to stop working at 11 o'clock at night when there's a school, or when school's in session. I'm not going to be doing my loudest work. It doesn't mean you're confined to those, but it does give you some level of predictability. And
No. So this would be something, again, as an implementation measure that we would work towards after the plan's adopted. Say, okay, now we have these policies. Now, how do we make it as easy as possible for someone coming in to meet these standards?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what most applicants want to say. What do I need to do to meet the standards? What are my requirements? If we can hand them, here are a list of acceptable mitigations. Trying to think what else is in this. Here's some design techniques you can incorporate into your project that would reduce the noise. Or, if road noise is an issue, you could use, there's noise attenuating pavement you can use. There's a variety of different techniques that can reduce the noise level. That someone can say, okay, well, I can do that. That works for me.
See, but there you go using plain language again. You're slipping. So that's the kind of statement I think that makes sense for what do we mean by uniform noise management standard. We want to create lists of
Kind of a user-friendly, how to use this,
Yes,
how to interpret our standards. This is
It's
what
all on TV, it's recorded for later, Peter. He says it so well, but then you read it and you kind of have
I
to
know,
struggle
it's because
through it.
there's a different software that he uses to
In
write.
his brain, yeah.
we can play with that and try to simplify that for you, so that it basically makes
It looks a little intimidating right now.
Well,
but
it's
when you
not,
talk
and
about
it's
the
like
fact
that
that
one.
what we're trying to do is give people the tools they need
Right.
to address the noise issues that they may be
Yeah.
from their project, and here's all the things that you can do. Boy, then now it sounds like, wow, they're out there to help me, and that's what we want
Right.
more
Which is
of.
in fact the purpose of that program.
Which is really just what I need, like you said, what do I need to do to meet the standards?
Right. We can try to make that a little more
Okay.
user-friendly.
That was
1B,
good.
hey,
That was good. Are we all in agreement? We didn't hear from you down there, Kelly.
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
So 1C, transportation-related noise. Coordinate with I probably should say Calaveras County Council of Governments
Yes.
to evaluate truck route plans and continue to gather input from local communities and businesses to minimize truck travel through residential and visitor serving centers. My question here is, are we trying to minimize truck travel? I mean, maybe that's part of it, but are we really trying to minimize the noise? From the trucks, right.
Noise
And that
and
they
impact.
designate various truck routes, and
But you're not going to minimize truck travel on roads that are designated for, as a truck route.
correct,
Right.
right. But you would, go ahead.
If you have designated truck routes, then the out-of-town truck drivers will say, oh, here's the route I'm supposed to
Right.
go. And I don't know what kind of enforcement there is, if a truck's going down a different road, whether the sheriff goes out there, I just don't know.
They're supposed to know what the routes
But they're
are.
supposed to know what the routes are, and the COG helps, in the transportation plan to design and develop those in coordination with the county public works department. So here's where we think the appropriate truck routes are. That's adopted, and so it's just a matter of continuing to do that. Look at the noise aspect of identifying those truck routes.
And this is not something that changes very often.
No,
And you crossed out Calaveras County Public Works Department. You don't think they play any role in that?
no, that's who's coordinating with them. The public works department is coordinating with, it's the county coordinating with the council of governments.
So you're just crossing out the counties because it's sort of a default that
Yeah.
we're the ones that are going to be coordinating.
Right.
And the county's only interested really in the bus traffic. And they run the bus system.
Okay. So here we're just saying we're going to coordinate with the Council of Governments as they gather information, just so that we're privy to that. And
They aren't as aware of our land use policies as we are. So we want to make sure they are when they do this.
right, so
Or
that,
their focus may be more on getting vehicles from point A to point B. We're saying, okay, point A to point B is important, but don't forget about noise
right,
when we're relooking.
or
at
routing,
routes.
or making
Yeah.
the quickest route between 2 points right through a residential neighborhood, or,
And maybe we ought to add Caltrans in that list too, because there probably is, if Caltrans is involved in any kind of designation of truck routes on their state highways.
Yeah, they need more signs so people stop getting jackknifed on Ebbets Pass. Those GPSs are sending them the wrong way.
any other comments on 1C?
No.
No.
All right, 1D, best management practices, make noise management standards for new construction / remodeling, available on the county website, and then it says and/or, but I would suggest should just be and, at the public counter of the planning department.
Okay, so see, this is where I struggle with everything that you said before. Because we talk about this noise ordinance not particularly applying. Okay, so we're just going to make the standards available for new construction and remodeling.
This would be informational for voluntary,
Okay, so this isn't something where it's a discretionary deal. This is a ministerial act, and so somebody building a new house in a subdivision just has to comply with the county ordinance under the noise standards, start work time for work and end time.
So is
Okay.
this related to
but
1B
if
above?
there are ways that they could reduce, maybe there are fairly simple construction techniques that reduce interior noise even more. That information's available, it's out there. We could just, make sure that's on our website. Someone could be cruising down the building department website and say, oh, noise reduction standards. Well, I could do that. That would make my bedroom even quieter. I could, those kinds of things that would
It's just a
just help
recommendation.
with, it's not nothing we're going to require, but we make that information available.
It's not in the ordinance, it's just helpful information.
Helpful information, exactly.
Okay, I would suggest that, and I agree with Fawn's language change here on and, but not the planning department, because most people wouldn't think that you would even have that information. I think it should be in the building department, that you would be the primary source of that, whether they're little brochure racks,
It could be both.
how to work more quietly or whatever the heck.
Or appropriate
I'm
county
sure all the
departments?
hard hat guys are going to pick one up.
And then it
So
should-
are
But
we,
the architects and designers.
Yeah.
are these best management practices, what's the relationship between them and the uniform noise management standards?
How you get to the uniform noise, how do you meet those standards? What materials are out there?
Okay.
What new materials
Okay.
might be available?
I get it.
What local business do you have that wants to advertise the availability of their new
Okay.
materials?
I don't think I think 1D is not actually referring to standards, it's referring to techniques
Right.
or something like that. It's not
Practices, yeah.
It doesn't rise to the level of a standard.
Right.
And I think a link to the noise ordinance
Practice of writing
9.02
standards.
should be included with that list.
Say again?
So the noise ordinance 9.02 should be linked with that so that they know our county has a noise ordinance for start and stop times, not just,
Oh, yeah, but this is additional to that. And if you want to reference the noise ordinance, but this is something else. This is not referencing the ordinance, it's referencing,
best practices.
yes.
And best practices would be knowing what our noise ordinance in the county is.
It will include that, I suppose, but it would also include a number of things that you can do that, no one's going to shoot you if you don't do them, but this is a good idea.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So are we moving on to acoustic analysis?
I am.
All right, well, I'm with you.
Thank you.
So when acoustic analysis is required for a development project, the analysis shall be prepared by a qualified professional and include the following: ambient noise level measurements of existing conditions, anticipated noise levels generated by the project, recommend measures to achieve compliance with noise standards set forth in tables 1 and 2, estimate of noise levels after the mitigation measures have been implemented, and a noise monitoring program.
The only question I have, comment that I have about this item is that I think it would be helpful to tell the reader what are examples of when an acoustic analysis is required. And FYI, when is that?
Goes back to policy 113.
The threshold.
And you'll now be referencing which policy it's implementing.
And now that you're, okay, what was it, 1.6?
113?
Again, please?
113.
113.
Yeah, it's just the one that says they have to hire somebody to do all this.
Yeah, okay. This goes to the advisability of the point that was made about including the
And could we,
policy and the implementation. Yes, okay.
could we put a footnote to that that says reference 1.3, 1.13?
It'll be doing.
All of them based upon what you decided this morning.
We're going to say exactly for each implementation program what policy it supports.
Thank you.
So all of these will
So
be
you can
in
just
there.
you can just flip right back to it.
Is it understood, because I'm imagining that this acoustic analysis would be paid for by the applicant?
Yeah.
Is it understood, would someone understand that they would be responsible for that?
According to 1.13, they would.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other, I have a question. I mean, are we done with these before we move to the public comment period?
Do we have to go over? No, we don't. Never mind.
So it says that state law requires that no noise contours be shown for identified noise generators.
Where are you reading?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm back on the staff report, the first page. And that we don't have those contours yet because they haven't been created yet, because they're going to be created based on, through the EIR process, once we know what the land uses are. Sort of?
Sort of. We know what our stationary noise sources are. We know
Well,
how-
yeah, they're not going anywhere, I guess,
They're
right?
not going anywhere.
Right.
We actually did readings on them. We know how far away from the road they are. If we wanted to today, we could do a noise contour map. We were just delaying that till we did the EIR, and we're going to create the ones that also showed our future transportation. So we have the information.
Okay. Well, here's my question, and maybe that, since we talk about it, and we are talking about it that, we don't have it now, but we're going to have it, should there be something in here that says, Well, I guess evidently we'll have a map, right? Will there be a contour map in the element?
Likely in the background report?
Okay, in this noise element when it's done?
There will be a map. We'll probably also have more detailed maps available because, you know, a map that's going to fit in here, you won't be able to read. You know,
Right.
the width of the line will be the width of the, but it will show generally where the noise generating areas are. And then we'll refer to more detailed maps that we'll have available for the public, probably maybe online, that you can say, okay, at this location, if I'm going to be building my subdivision, this location against this highway, you know, I've got a 65 dB that's 133 feet from the center of the road, or whatever, you know, whatever the dimension is. So that information, that more precise information will be available. It won't be, you won't be able to get that from an insert into this, but we'll have a generalized map that's inserted in here, and then we'll have the more detailed contours available.
When you say detailed contours, how detailed do these things get?
Only as detailed as we can get them, because, you know, if you have a hillside or something that would block the noise, some of them almost don't always take that into account.
Well, when you look at the thing, what are you looking at? A map of the county, and then you zoom in and you see little dots, and the dots are colored by how noisy it is at that spot? I mean,
So primarily we're talking about transportation noise. You're looking at future ADT.
so it's going to follow the major roads, and it's going to be some kind of color coding that shows it's really noisy through this stretch.
Probably.
And there's going to be a circle around the airport, and it's going to say, here's what your noise is emanating from this point are.
And we'll have a few stationary sources that will identify those as well. The mine
Like
sites.
the
industrial sites.
concrete plant where they're doing blasting. The neighbors mentioned that they
Yeah.
can hear when that happens. Yeah.
So those noise sources will all be identified. And then it's sort of a triggering mechanism that say, okay, I'm proposing a project within this area. I'm going to need to do something a little more detailed to refine that. We know that generally there is a 100 or 200 foot swath of land between the road and my project that's going to be noisy. Exactly how noisy is it? Does terrain take into effect? Does it reduce it? Does it increase it? That's the kind of thing that the noise analysis the acoustic analysis would detail us. So that the design of the project then could take those detailed issues into account.
So, which gets to my question, is it important in the noise element to talk about the relationship of the contour maps to the land use element and how they'll be used?
We can.
Well, I mean, since it's coming, because if it's coming and we don't talk about it, it's just going to be a map. But I think it would be important to show how that would be used.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting in the background report, just FYI. You would never guess on some of these roads.
Fascinating. I'm gonna read that tonight. Yeah.
In some way.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's like when Lisa said it'd be fun to compare all of those standardized charts from all the different agencies.
Don't
I'm
you
like,
think that's fun?
fun? No, didn't know.
You can get a cup of coffee and just start.
Yeah, and go for it. Yeah. So, are there any other comments on? I don't know. What did the commissioners think about adding the discussion about the contours and how they'd be used?
That's
Okay.
good.
Okay.
More's good on
Okay.
that respect.
So, at this point, we'd like to hear from the public, or?
Would you take comments from the public here? Now, we're going to be noise is going to come back to us on the next meeting with these various ingredients changed. To what point are we saying, we're going to do like we did today, where, yeah, that reflects what we said, and we move through it in that fashion? Or is noise coming, are all the elements coming back for discussion?
I think what I would recommend is after the public comment, if there's any additional changes you would like us to incorporate into it based
upon what we hear,
then direct us to do that. We will then make these changes and bring it back to you for further deliberation. And you know, I think we have, some of them are fairly simple changes, other ones are, you know, we're going to have to really think about that, how we're going to craft it. We don't have the language in front of us right now. So we will bring that back at the next meeting then, and we'll sort of go through the process we did at the end of the hearing. You probably want to open it up again to the public to see, did we reflect?
Because there's going to be enough new.
There's going to be new information. There's going to be quite a bit of additional text added to it, so. But I think if there's some basic concepts now that the public wants to, you know,
Yeah.
bring to your
Influence,
attention,
absolutely.
that would be
Now's your better
Now's the
chance
time.
than
Now would
later.
be the time to do it.
So with that, I will invite the public to talk about our discussion and deliberations on the noise element.
I'm Keith Thalia again.
Thank you.
And I know quite a bit about the noise ordinances at various locations because I worked all over California and Nevada for 41 years. I never went to find out where the general plan was for that county. I never went to the planning commission. I went to the air pollution control office. They could even tell me what their requirements were or tell me where I had to go to get their requirements. So why are you trying to write ordinances, people? A simple way to bring this to fruition is to just say that the noise ordinances in this county will be strictly enforced and refer you to the Air Pollution Control Department. Because what I can see happening here is somebody come in and get your general plan and he reads what your air pollution control requirements are. He goes right over to the Air Pollution Control Office and they have a different set of requirements. Immediately you're going to have a lawsuit. Another thing I didn't hear mentioned that's real important in noise ordinances is time of day to start. Believe it, I paid many fines for that. But in Folsom it cost me $300 to start before 7 in the morning. But the difference of starting at 6 or 7 meant I lost one load a day to the dump. So I was able to get their requirement amended. I think it cost me $100 or $150 where I could start at 6 in the morning. But I think if you're going to write an ordinance, that's something that should be in it is the time of day you're going to allow the noise to be made. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Tom Infacino, Calaveras Planning Coalition. Some of you may have the July 22nd email I sent that discussed both the implementation programs, the objectives, and the noise element. So if you have that in front of you, that might help as we go over this. I'm going to make 5 points, so I'll try and make them quickly. Page 3 of that email, item B, I say that the state, which county department is responsible for implementing the programs following the planning, and whether there's going to be planning commission review and board supervisor approval. What I mean by that is, if you go to the implementation program, for example, NOI 1-B, you've talked about extensively, you said there's going to be uniform noise management standards developed. So we already said that we'd be identifying which department will be doing that, but I guess the next question is, are those standards going to just be unilaterally developed by the planning department, or are those the kind of standards that are going to come to you for review and then the board of supervisors for approval? The other example of that is NOI 1-D, best management practices. Are those going to be just a handout that's generated by the planning department, or are those the kind of things that are going to come before you for review and the board of supervisors for approval? The reason I bring that up is because right now, for example, as Mr. Tuno pointed out, you can go to the planning department, and if you have a question about how to deal with light and glare, they have a little handout. And it's just a little handout on ways to mitigate light and glare. It's very useful. Probably doesn't need to come before you or the board of supervisors. But on something like uniform noise management standards, generally those are the sorts of things that would get your review and board review. So I think it would be helpful to identify whether that's going to happen or not. The second item, state that noise reduction techniques will be applied to expanded uses. Commissioner Lisa brought up that issue. We talked about, well, it does not, the issue came up, doesn't apply to existing uses, and she said, but it applies to expanded uses, and people need to know that. So what I was suggesting is that in the introduction section, so before people get too far in the element, where the code where the introduction in the last sentence reads, noise standards are intended to apply to new projects and noise generators to reduce noise conflict, I would add, noise standards are intended to apply to new or expanded projects, just so people right up front know that, because I think Lisa pointed out made a good observation, and we shouldn't have people guess or find out about that.
Could you slow down for a second
Sure.
and point me to the sentence that you're on?
The last sentence in the introduction says noise standards
Yes.
are intended to apply to new projects and noise generators to reduce noise conflicts. My suggestion is noise standards are intended to apply to new or expanded projects and noise generators to reduce noise conflicts. Simply so people don't find that out later by accident after they've already bought the building and go in to get the permit and go, you know.
And it said, but it only said new.
Exactly. Okay. Item 3, there was a discussion, one of our comments when we made the comments earlier in the year about this was the issue of parks and park noise. And the staff report does not recognize public parks as a noise-sensitive use. In fact, the staff report suggested, well, they're noisy uses. What are you talking about, noise-sensitive uses? Let me give an explanation of the concern here. The concern is that oftentimes when we're doing land use planning, we use parks as buffers between the industrial section of the area and the residential section of the area. And while that's useful, it's also important to ensure that the noise generating, the noise generated doesn't too much impede with the park use. Let me give you an example. Where I grew up in Burlingame in the Bay Area, and there's a park called Coyote Point Park, and it's adjacent to Interstate 101. They did a great job of designing the picnic area. They put it on the other side of the hill, away from the highway, so that people could enjoy their picnics without the highway noise. They did a great job with the beach. They put a great big berm up between the highway and the beach, so you could enjoy the beach without the highway noise. They even released a private use of this section, and the restaurant put in really serious acoustical insulation and double pane windows and all that, so people had these wonderful romantic, dinners overlooking the beach, overlooking the water and the lights. It was beautiful. What they left out was any noise buffer between the highway and the golf course. So any of you who've ever tried to putt with a semi-truck screaming by will know that there's a little bit of a problem there. So basically what we're hoping you could do is include a sentence that would say something along the lines of design noise generating neighboring uses and noise buffering parks to provide sufficient noise attenuation to accommodate park uses. So we're not saying don't use them as buffers. We're just saying make sure that we're designing them in a way that the park's still useful. The fourth thing I want to point out is, and this is to get again to Commissioner Lisa's concern. There's concern about are we going to put in these policies that are going to shut down business in the county. And this is a question, and I'd like Peter to answer this. I think I've got it right, but all by right industrial and commercial noise generators, that means by right is without a discretionary permit or without a discretionary approval or use permit, in the zoning code will not be subject to these standards. Is that correct? So if you're a by right industrial or commercial use, and you don't need a use permit or a discretionary approval, these noise standards won't apply to you. So there's going to be lots and lots of noisy uses that are not going to have to comply with these standards. And the last thing I want to say is, well, two last things, sorry. Commissioner Tino asked what do noise contours look like, and you'll find out soon, but there's basically an isoplot map. So it'll have the noise generating use here, and then it'll have a little circle that'll say 65 dB, and out there it'll be 66, and out there it'll be 67. So that's what it'll look like.
When it's a particular source, as opposed to a highway, which is just a long line.
Sometimes it'll be from the highway, back from the highway.
Right.
Long
really?
line. So 66 is here, 65 is here, 66 is here, 67 is here. Finally, I just want to say, these are the sorts of clear standards and the list of mitigation measures that we've been talking about that will help applicants comply with CEQA. It's important that we do this, that we integrate CEQA compliance with the general plan. This is going to help make the county more business friendly. It's going to help people get through the process quicker. It's going to help the planning department process applications more efficiently. And so we hope we'll see more of this kind of stuff in the general plan. Thank you. Any questions?
Anyone else? No? All right, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the Planning Commission.
I would like to go back to the introduction, referencing what Tom said about expanded projects, because I think that is a big deal, and it does need to be upfront and in people's faces right away. So
I think the proper term for that would be expanded uses. New projects or expanded uses.
that would work for me. I do believe it needs to be in that introduction, and I'm glad he caught that. Is everybody else okay with that?
I'm going back and look.
Okay.
Last line and then
Thank
second,
you.
the new paragraph of the introduction statement.
Back to that part of the book.
That's great.
I'm on the,
Wow.
I was on the objective, sorry.
I'm
I'm like, I don't see it in there.
My red line one. Thanks, Tom. That was a long time ago.
It sort of changes that phrase a little bit. I'm trying to figure out the best way to do this, because the phrase was new projects and noise generators. New being the operative word. By using or expanded uses, it makes it sound like new projects, expanded uses, and noise generators, which could get to the point, and I don't think that's what we mean to say.
No.
Maybe we just
Can you
play
put
with that language a little bit to make it clear that we're not talking about existing noise sources.
Right.
We're talking about expanding.
Yeah.
If you could find that language and bring it back.
We'll play with that language
Okay.
to bring it back.
That'd make me happy.
Did I give you one of these?
Yes.
Okay. This is really helpful to the layperson, or at least this layperson. Here it was prepared by Caltrans, evidently in connection with an I-5 project up in South Reading. Okay, so they were doing probably a 4-lane extension to 6-lane project, and they wanted everybody to know, here's what we mean by noise. And maybe a bit of marketing on their part, but in any case, it tells you what things are like. It tells you what a typical decibel level means in terms of everyday life experiences. I think that's extremely valuable. I presume these are, I mean, it doesn't tell you what the weighted average is or anything like that. It could be the moment or a peak or something like that, but it does include the statement that an increase of 3 dBA is barely perceptible to the human ear. And that 3 dBA, whether it's one time or constant or frequent or whatever, 3 dBA increase is nothing. I don't know why it was included here. Apparently it was applicable to the project that they were doing, but I think that's a significant statement, and I like being able to see what decibels mean in my everyday experience, because I don't know what 45 feels like, but now I know that 45 is a quiet evening in the city where there's not any particular, there's no sirens going off.
We could certainly add some type of informational chart along these lines to the introduction to have a better, clearer understanding for the public when they read this, to understand noise and noise measurements, if
With
that's what you're getting at.
noise they're familiar with,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, these kinds of comparison charts are very helpful to.
So getting to one of Tom's other questions was, what is the intent or plan for the you know, both of the documents, the uniform noise management standards, and I guess the best management practices. Is that something that would just be produced in-house, or is it, do you think that's going to be
If there are
something?
standards that the county is adopting, the county has to adopt that. That's not the planning department. That would be either the commission or the board of supervisors. If they're informational handouts, that's something we can do. So if there are existing pieces of information that's already out there, that's something we could just create.
And we're not drawing a
But
line in the
if the county's
sand.
saying, here are our standards, that's the board of supervisors.
Mm-hmm.
That's a legislative act.
Okay. And then Tom was asking about noise attenuation buffers around parks.
Oh, show me where you're talking about what Tom had to say?
Yes.
Because I had lost where he was talking about. I was writing notes from his previous comment.
Do you have his,
Yes.
July 22nd memo on page
3 or 4.
3?
Well, give me the NO
No.
number thing.
Oh, no, this isn't his.
No, it's in the
I
staff
think it's
report.
suggesting we add language, I think it's the
Right
very
here, add
last.
parks as a noise-sensitive use.
Staff report?
Here. I struggle with that one.
I think they're more of a
Because-
source than a use, but
Our county is pretty rural. We don't have major highways and freeways, and our parks, yes, they act as buffers, but they also are playing a role in some open space there as well. I don't know how you would facilitate buffering a park in our county.
They're often the, you know, sort of the common backyard for everybody. You know, they have birthday parties
Feeding
and all
park's right
kinds
on
of.
the highway.
So
Yeah.
if we're putting a park in the middle of a residential neighborhood, a new development, and you're wanting to buffer them,
I think the example that Tom gave was a sort of a classic one where you have a very noisy use and that, you know, right along a freeway, maybe, you know, next to the airport, you know, if it's truly a buffer between an industrial use and a proposed subdivision, then some type of design would be appropriate, you know, to minimize that high level of noise. I don't think it's I mean, in our standard, we have a very high threshold for noise. I think it was the highest one of all. Because my experience has been most of the issues associated with noise is complaints about noise from the park.
Right.
You know, the ball games, the late nights, whatever's going on. But I think that, I don't know if it raises to the level of needing a policy, but, and I think that the situation in Burlingame is quite different than we have here. Doesn't mean it couldn't be, though. And I'm just, you know, trying to sort of think beyond today, you know, within the next 20 years, where might a park be developed, and could such a situation occur? I don't have a problem with putting in a policy like that, so that if we get a new park in the county, and hopefully we will someday, that those kind of issues are addressed in the design of the park. It's most likely going to be addressed anyway by the people designing the park, but to have a policy in the plan certainly doesn't hurt, so that there's something we can point to say, you know, take this into consideration when you're designing the park.
it hurts in the fact that developers are taking on a lot of road and infrastructure costs just to get a development going already. Those buffers, depending on what it could be, I would hope that the developer would be intelligent enough to place it properly, but I mean, what would you require that buffer to look like? But what, are you talking a big wall? Are you talking we're going to bring in concrete and dirt? What kind of buffers are you talking about to buffer that noise level? I mean, if we put so many demands on these developers talking about getting in, I mean, there's not much left as far as bringing that in. What would you propose that something like that would look like? And how much more are we putting on a developer?
Something, you know, I thought we were talking about parks, but...
We are, but you're saying put a buffer zone up.
Well, if
That's going to
If
affect
a
a developer
proposal
because
is
no one
in
else
the-
is going to put a
Yeah.
park in.
So someone's proposing a project next to a major roadway that's got a lot of traffic on it, so that noise contour is fairly wide.
Okay,
There are several different techniques, and that's, I think, what we're getting to in that implementation measure B, is that we're going to create sort of a set of standards that people can use. And here's what's acceptable to the county. It could be creating a landscape berm. So you build a berm that blocks the noise. Maybe we don't want to see sound walls. We're going to say sound walls are out. We don't want sound walls. They're too urban for our county. Setbacks, and again, it's going to depend on, how dense the project is, how much loss of units that setback is going to create, or do they cluster, the development away from that area that's noisy. There's a lot of different techniques that can be used to avoid or minimize the impact of noise. And usually it's a combination of several things. If doing nothing requires your 100-foot setback from the road, and you just have a green belt along there, that's an option. Maybe you put in a berm, landscape berm, and it reduces that to 40 or 50 feet. So then you can utilize that additional 40 or 50 feet for lots and housing or whatever it is you're building. So there's different techniques. It's going to depend on the location and the desires of the applicant.
so we would have to have code written that would address this in all different respects, or are you saying this would be something that would be ministerial and staff would, or the department would decide at that time what would be best?
This would apply for a discretionary project.
Okay.
And we would work with the applicant, say, here's the standard you need to meet. You can't have the outdoor activity area of the home exceed whatever our threshold is. So you're putting backyards in there, and they're not going to butt up against the highway because it's too noisy. You need to change it somehow to mitigate that noise impact. And here's some different options. You can create a green belt, just so leave it open. You can put a berm up there that blocks the noise. You can, those are the two that sort of readily come to mind, but I'm sure there's other options as well that
So if you
minimize that noise. So then there's, you can utilize that property differently.
go ahead, Amy.
Just to really muddy the waters, parks.
I was wondering, what does that have to do with parks?
If we get back to parks, I think the focus really is more on public parks and not on a private park that you would normally do in conjunction with a subdivision.
Okay.
Because really, getting a bit to your point in terms of putting that on a developer, I don't think that was the intent of the comment from the public.
Well, if you reference parks and you don't use the word public parks, developers, incentives could put in parks. That's where I see them coming at, because I don't see our public adding a whole bunch of future parks right at the moment.
However, they're not usually the ones that build the public park in a location
They give the
off-site.
land, yeah.
Right.
Well, the reality here is we don't have any
Parks.
public parks per se. There's parks that are open to the public, but they're all operated privately
Right,
by community groups,
right.
Private organizations.
Sad but true.
Where if we start seeing larger residential developments, we require the dedication of parkland. That parkland needs to be usable for park purposes.
That's why.
Ball fields, those kinds of things.
Well, that's why you and I went off into developer and a park coming in, because that's more realistically what
And
I'm seeing
someone could
happen.
utilize, an area that would otherwise be too noisy for residential purposes for the park use. So, a 200-unit project has to dedicate a couple of acres of parkland, and probably we would require that it be developed to some degree.
I guess
that
my-
would be where the ball field would go. That would be where the soccer field is.
I guess my concern, Peter, would be who's going to enforce what type of barrier goes up? Where do those rules come into play? Do you make them up as you go along? Say I come to you and I say I'm going to put in a park, give it to the public, and who's going to enforce that? Who's going to pay for that? Where are those rules coming from? I mean, if you're not here in 10 years from now and we get this wonderful land donated in exchange for building a development and we're going to do something with this parkland, who's to say the next person in doesn't want this god-awful, ugly concrete wall? I guess I'm real hesitant to do this because I don't know what we're going to end up with because there's no rules around it.
Well, and that's why ultimately the rules would need to come back to the commission and the board. If we're developing standards, if here's the kind of noise mitigation that's acceptable in this county, here are the things that will work and that we want to see, here are the things we don't want to see. And if it's, a concrete block sound wall, that's your choice, the board's choice of, is that an appropriate mitigation for Calaveras County?
So it would come back through,
So the implementation measure 1B says we're going to adopt standards. That comes back to you and the board. If it's an individual project, it also goes to you and possibly the board, depending on the process. But it would be something that is recommended by their consultant, proposed by the applicant, found to be acceptable by the county, the department, and ultimately acted on by the planning commission or the board.
Well, this got started because of conditions surrounding parks.
Right.
Is it quite possible that we don't need to deal with this yet because it's not even on it's not on the horizon?
Well, it should be dealt with if we think that it might become an issue over the next 20 years.
It could be, but if we saw it coming, could we not use one of our amendment periods to say, for the planning department to come before us and say, it's time to add a consideration for parks in the general plan because there's a bunch of them on the books being proposed.
Or you could handle it as an open space issue. The situation described was they wanted someplace quiet. Well, you can talk about in your open space element, if you wanted, without talking about parks specifically, say, and consideration for areas of contemplation or something, as opposed to specifying parks.
I think it makes all the difference in the world how you view a park as a sensitive noise receptor or a major noise producer.
could it be something so simple as Frisbee golf, and now you're putting demands on people to put up sound barriers for throwing a Frisbee? I'm not willing to touch this right now, but you guys can go.
I don't think, I'm saying I don't think we need to add anything one way or the other, controlling parks or protecting parks. We don't have near enough parks to protect anyway.
But we could. Let's think positive.
We could, if we certainly could if the economy would grow.
You could donate land to us.
Yeah, and that's what it would take because the county can't afford to buy anything. That's true.
I have one question. If the general plan doesn't have anything like what's being proposed here, but sometime in the next 20 years it looks like the county should come up with some rules or standards, wouldn't the Board of Supervisors be able to handle that by an ordinance without having a general plan amendment to authorize the ordinance?
I think, yes, I think it could. It sort of depends on the scope and scale of what is the issue. If it's otherwise addressed in the general plan, it may require a general plan amendment. If the general plan is silent, the county does have, they can adopt an ordinance that addresses an immediate need. We don't have anything addressing marijuana in our general plan, and yet it has consumed the board with the amount of effort that we've gone into to try to figure out how to regulate it. So we don't have to have something in our general plan to address an ongoing need.
Okay. I would also...
However, there are requirements on noise that we need to meet in the state law. And that's what we're trying to address here is what issues need to be addressed under the rubric of the noise element of the general plan to be consistent with state law.
Okay, could you expand on that to answer Mr. Talia's question as to why the noise element can't simply say, we will enforce our noise ordinance? That was his comment was, why can't it be that simple?
Because state law goes well beyond just simple noise ordinance. There's many things we need to look at the effect of new development on, the health and safety of the individuals.
We don't have that luxury of
That's not in the
ignoring it,
ordinance.
yeah.
The noise ordinance addresses a very narrow issue associated with noise. The noise element's much broader than that.
But you brought up a really good point. If someone's going to put in a public park, we have a noise element that we're putting into place that they would have to comply with. So if they're putting it and they're backing it up to a residential area, that park, in order to go in, would at that point in time have to address it, and you could look at each one individually. So if the noise element's in effect, it would automatically apply to parks if they're going back up to a residential or whatever, right? So that's already addressed. It's generally, it's a generalized, but it's not specific. And I think trying to get specific, because you don't know if that park's going to be, Copperopolis, San Andreas, Valley Springs, Arnold, you don't have Moke Hill, it could be anywhere. And every area is so unique. To try and set guidelines without actually looking at the spot, seeing what it needs, what fits into that community, because we're all unique in our communities. I think it's too hard to put guidelines on a park.
I think that, noise policies 1 and 2 generally get to that issue.
I do
that
too.
You design new uses.
And I think each one needs to be looked at individually versus depending on the community it's going into.
Well, your table noise 1/8 does list neighborhood parks with a number of 70 by it, whatever that means. So I don't know why we need to do anything more than that.
So the outdoor
No, I'm sorry, the
activity DBs would be 70.
The public hearing portion is concluded.
Closed.
Yes, thank you, I'm sorry.
So isn't that covered under table 1?
As a noise generator, it is in effect.
So, but it has a decibel of 70 in there, or
So
dB,
that
not
is the
decibel.
maximum level of noise for parks. So that would be a standard that we have, yes.
Never hung out with 5-year-old girls?
Yeah.
I think they can outdo that. Not for 24 hours.
So is there some consensus direction on the park issue?
I'd like to leave it open to letting it take place based on community and let it be looked at individually. I don't want to add anything.
I don't want to add anything. I don't think it's necessary.
Same here.
All righty, okay.
So I think we have a number of things to work on over the next couple
Right.
of weeks. We'll be bringing that back.
And do you need any further direction? Are you sort of clear on the,
I think we are, yeah.
okay.
Where are we for next week? Are we?
We're not having a meeting next week.
So again?
No meeting next week.
Okay.
Need preparation time?
I need some time. We've got this. We're going to be working on so we'll continue this, we'll continue noise until the meeting of the 20th. The 13th is going to be a full agenda of regular items.
Okay, so the
No
13th is
meeting next week.
regular,
We just need some
and then the
time
20th
to prepare
is...
and get the information out in a timely manner so that people have a chance to review it.
So we know noise will be on the
Noise will be
agenda.
on, and then we will try to get the background document. We're working on that next.
Okay,
I think
Okay.
it's important to get that done and
13th is asphalt plant and more?
several other items,
Okay.
regular agenda items.
okay. So you just sort of gave us your report, right? Under reports?
Continuation discussion of the general plan, yes.
Yeah. So we have another public comment period.
I just was hoping I could get an answer to my question about all by right industrial and commercial noise generators would not fall under this because they're not discretionary projects?
Oh, you asked, sorry, and you were contemplating,
Yeah, that's by default, the fact that it applies to discretionary is true. I'm trying to think if there are any situation where a normally by right type of use might somehow fall into any of these policy language.
Well, if you needed a use permit for some other reason, then it would
If
stop
you use
being.
it, then it's discretionary. It
Right,
doesn't apply.
right.
So we could certainly add a statement to that effect if that has helped clarify things.
Well, I think that's one of the things that we discussed that we were going to put into the beginning portion of these tables was make it plain language what is going to comply to that, and then in a couple of weeks, he's going to bring it back to us to review that language.
Yes, so there's a huge amount of stuff that's allowed by right in commercial zones and industrial zones that this isn't going to touch.
Perfect. That means we're business friendly.
Yes, that's the case. If we're saying the noise standards only apply to to discretionary uses, we have uses that are allowed by right in the zone. Its own commercial, that use can go in. We would not require.
But a conditional use permit would automatically trigger it.
That would trigger it.
Perfect.
So that makes me wonder about, so it doesn't serve us well if we bring in a new business and lose another one because of the noise that's generated by right or whatever. So I'm wondering, there are a lot of uses that maybe generate noise outside, some inside, some not at all. And depending on what they do, if they're there enjoying the peaceful enjoyment of their property, and then all of a sudden there's someone that, a business that we bring in that is by right, not required, what's the word I'm looking for, not
Discretionary?
That doesn't fall under these guidelines.
No, Marty, they all are going to fall under these guidelines. It's just that some have to go out and hire a person to come out and do a test to evaluate what their business is going to sound like.
Okay.
But once they're going to open up by right, they're still, that is going to be our noise element in this county. It's just that certain, and correct me if I'm wrong, but certain ones would have to go out and hire somebody to come out and tell and give us a report on what their company is going to produce sound-wise.
So when we review a discretionary project, we will apply these standards and CEQA and everything else to that to ensure that it's appropriate fit for that, that location. If it's a conditional use permit, you guys have the say in whether or not that should be located in that location. And, a too noisy generator in a quieter location may be grounds for denying that project.
Yep.
If it is permitted by right, if it is a use that's listed in our zone, we have no ability to go and say, well, you're allowed, except for you have to do, that puts discretion on it. The way to address that is if we amend our zoning ordinance to say, well, these noisy uses don't belong in this zone. We're zoning this area for professional office commercial, which is often used as a buffer between residential and more noisy commercial areas. There are usually quieter uses such as office spaces and dentist office, those kinds of things. We're not going to say, and we're going to allow a stamp mill in there. Those would go into the noisy categories. We have a different zone for that. And that's where we address the issue of the by right uses versus the conditional uses. And so we may need to adjust as we go through the next step of this whole process will be to look at our zoning ordinance and how do we amend the code to implement the general plan. And we may be looking at some of those uses. I guarantee we'll be looking at those uses to say, is this appropriate as a by right use in this zone? Should some of these uses that are listed now by right become conditional? Are there some conditional uses that there's no reason we process a conditional use permit, let's make them by right. That's the kind of discussion we'll have next when we get to it on how do we further implement this plan.
So I guess I'm also wondering, because we want to be sensitive to the new businesses as well as the existing businesses, right? So if a situation arises where all of a sudden an existing business is having trouble doing business because of the noise that's been allowed to come in, is there any remedy for them? That's what I'm wondering. Because we do have situations like that, that we maybe either need to
standards in the ordinance
fix and or remedy, make sure we are sensitive to those things moving forward. But when it's happened to you, suddenly life is no longer peaceful, you know? So I'm just wondering.
So if there's a violation of the noise standards of the ordinance, that would apply across the board.
Well, that's kind of,
Well, maybe it wasn't a violation of what we decided at the time. I don't know how it came about. But moving forward, I think we need to learn from, it's all about being sensitive and thoughtful in our planning, which I think we're really working on. And so I just wanted to make sure that you said something about taking certain projects individually, looking at them individually, and maybe we need to just dig a little deeper into exactly what is going to be generated, not only in this new business, but know the area, know what's already happening, maybe interview them or whatever and find out.
but if it's by right, we don't have the right to do that. Well, I'm just sitting here listening to all
I don't know, I think we
this.
need to talk about it, because if we lose our businesses that are already here, that's not cool, so.
Well, and I think that's what Peter's getting at, is as we go through this process and
We'll
looking
get
at the
there.
zoning ordinances, is looking at our lists of, uses permitted by right, and where that zoning's on the ground and existing uses there, and just, if it's all, like really loud ones, then maybe we shouldn't allow this other business in there by, maybe we should, they should be encouraged to, so changes that would, hopefully prevent conflicts, and based upon that information. Sir, if you wanted to speak before, it's public comment period, if you'd like to come back up.
Well, I was just going to, Lisa made a comment, she wanted to see something written into the plan about the type of berm walls or whatever you want to build. That's not up to the planning commission to do that. It's up to the contractor or the developer.
Right.
Because quite often the developer or the contractor has a better mousetrap than the other guys bidding on the job. I've been there more times than one. I was on the lesser end of the few times I had the better mousetrap. And the reason for that is today the equipment is better and better every day. And you can say, the contractor can say, well, I can't go out and buy new equipment. You can damn sure go out and lease it.
I totally agree with you. That's why I said it needs to be based on the area it's going.
Today. So I don't think you can write anything like that into a plan.
I agree.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? All right, I think we're adjourned and continue. Yes?
I have a
Well, hold
point of
on.
order. We did not approve the minutes from the previous meeting.
Because we don't have, the minutes weren't on the agenda.
I noticed it wasn't on the agenda, but I thought that was also a mistake.
No. Anything else? So we're adjourned and the hearings
Let
continued.
me make one little story here, which is kind of the other side of all this we've been talking about. If you go on Pole Station Road, you come to where the turnoff is to go into Paws. That used to be Russell Road. It came up from the post office, crossed Pole Station Road, and went on down out to the river. And people quit using it quite a bit. And the local ranchers used to kind of fence it off, hoping nobody would notice, and kind of make it like their property. And then all of a sudden, the word was out that the people that owned that big piece of property, from our company property to Tiscornia's or Laverone's, might go up for sale. So a big panic, and I said to myself, you better do something. And so real quick, I got a drill crew out there with a bulldozer and a front end loader, and we established a very small quarry right next to that road that goes over the hill past the school. And that was so that would be established as being a mining operation before anybody else bought it and decided they wanted to have a church or something there that might not be compatible. So that was established, this was in the late 70s. And it was established then as being a mining operation, so if anybody bought that property, they knew what was next door.
That was a smart move.
So that's your sound barrier, a mining operation.
There you go. All right, on that note,
Yeah, I have a question. I had
Yes.
put the noise element up on the screen and we never referred it. Should we should I not bother with that on the future elements? We've got sort of all the various paperwork in front of us. I don't know how helpful
I think it's good
would
to
be.
have it for the public because many of them don't have the paperwork.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll
So
continue to
I
send
don't
it
know
out.
that
There
we'll
for
use it, but
reference.
it could come in.
We'll
I
have
think
it- we'll have it
it's
continue
worth
to-
dragging here, I think.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
it is.
So we really are adjourned now.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.